Just try and join a couple of these things together, for so or not. I was wondering if either Jaco or Igor had anything they could say about how the results of a backcasting workshop can be fed into an agent-based model.
Yeah. Very nice question.
I have not used backcasting specifically in ABMs yet, so I would be very curious to see how that works. Yeah. So, for the record, I have not used backcasting yet, but that's something that is certainly worth. One thing I can imagine is that it could generate imaginable possible futures that you might want to grow out of your simulation and see if the assumptions you put into your agents could even, lead to those scenarios. And if they're severely mismatching, then you could start wondering, where am I? You could start asking questions.
Well, just a small addition. I think that the main value of agent-based modeling for approaches like transition management and backcasting is that you can, say, add more body to your pathways. So you have ideas, but whether and under which conditions that they will come about, that's uncertain. And actually making the visions is the easier part, but substantiating and assessing them and assessing their feasibility, that's the more the next thing to do. And for the pathways and the conditions there, agent-based modeling can be a major addition. But it's not widely applied yet. So there is, let's also say, like a research implication that we could go on there.
So Deanna, do you want to add something like this? So is there a connection between your work and the visions or the agent-based modeling?
Yeah, well, actually we're, from now on, we'll be making the connection. The backcasting workshops will be an essential part of how we match the upscaling, how we plan the upscaling of sustainability scenarios. So we'll, as I discussed briefly during my presentation, we'll just try to we'll start by translating the backcasting results into something that we could utilize in an environmental input-output framework, right? We try to translate the results into changes of demand or changes of production systems or distribution or environmental intensity of production. And of course, work together with some more complex and economic tools to maybe to move from the static input-output framework and have something more to say about the transition.
Yeah,
Can I respond to that? May I just respond to that for a second? It's a very interesting idea. It certainly should be pursued. One of the things, of course, to be very careful about is that as your scale grows, right? So you're saying now my consumption pattern is severely shifting. I'm changing a third of the economy. You cannot assume that your input-output table still makes sense because you're causing a restructuring of the economic system, which is completely not captured by IoT because that's the past. And so that's where, it might work if you're dealing with a small neighborhood and you're assuming the ceteris paribus for the rest of the world. But if you cannot, then that's it. And then it's still worth doing, but it's a big caveat of watch out. You cannot say that thus this will be the effect because just the fact that simulation produces a number doesn't mean it's meaningful.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think that's this is the big challenge. We start with the input-output framework, and that's basically the result in the short term. As I said, we'll seek collaboration with economists. We'll try to predict how the markets would change, how the rebound effects would, what kind of rebound would take place as well. This is the big challenge.
That's specifically the rebound is something that we actively decided not to consider in spring. We had a long debate whether we should do it, and we said no, we cannot sensibly do that. There is simply theoretically impossible. So we said no, we will just measure things like amount of time left and amount of money left, and then where that's going to go is not something you can say about it.
Yeah, Actually, the survey, the GLAMURS surveys is a good source that you could use to assess rebound, because you do have the sustainability initiative people, so you could see if there is a carbon reduction in those categories that the initiatives target, but is there an increase in others, or is there a holistic difference? Yeah.
Okay, Ricardo has a question.
Thank you, Sjak. Well, for me, it's a very interesting question, the questions made by Tony, because specifically when we work with sustainability in lifestyles, where there is no too much theory, probably we have not a theoretical framework. So the visions first and the pathways later can be the basement to replace this absence of theory, in the sense that to design the pathways, some theoretical assumptions have to be made in the sense of making predictions and considering numbers, considering variables, and leading to some kind of a structural equation model. And a structural equation modeling can be the basement of a social simulation. So the connection comes, well, have a trajectory, that starts on the visions, follow with the pathways, and later the predictions, and after the predictions, structural equation modeling, and finishing with a social simulation. So that could be based in a very well established preliminary study, in absence of theory.
So anybody want to respond to this remark, question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you for that. Especially in a social simulation, I find the word prediction is always very tricky. One of the things that we found, specifically when doing sort of model of socio-technical systems, is that the moment that you produce an outcome and you communicate the outcome, you automatically invalidate your simulation, right? Because you do not have the response of the agent to the new knowledge in your simulation. So you're constantly invalidating whatever you've done. And then saying that, well, thus I will predict, is that you will never hear me say that. It's just not. What, however, it can give you is a sense of, well, if my group of stakeholders and me believe this is how the world operates, under these assumptions, these are the possible futures that can be systematically explored given the model, which are by no means a prediction, but are, like Steve Jobs said, these are bicycles for the mind. They help one think systematically, because humans are not very good at systematic thinking, right? We have shortcuts, we have sorts of mental models that we apply on things. So I would be very careful with predictions and structural equations, because you're modeling the change of structure. So you need to know that you don't know, and thus act accordingly, being very, very, very careful.
I have two short questions. One is related to Igor's presentation. I was wondering about this, if in the survey, I know it's not what you presented, but I wonder whether you looked at also preferences and attitudes towards sharing, because when we talk about servicizing and we talk about, for example, sharing products, there are some deep-seated attitudes, sometimes resistances in different regions towards having to share certain things, or being so involved, in community activities. There's a desire for more of this, but sometimes there's also a resistance. So I wonder whether you took that into account in any way. And then also, I would be interested in knowing a bit about what were the results of the project in terms of, not all the results, but in terms of, for example, the environmental impact of these options. Yeah. So Diana was saying earlier that there are services have much less emissions than certain services have much less emissions than the consumption of individual products. So what would you say is the 2 or 3 main points that came out from the project on that topic?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. That's an excellent question. So on the matter of surveys, again, I did not do them myself, so this is from...
discussions
right.
of the project.
So what we did is specifically consider things like lifestyles and status. So specifically with cars, we could differentiate things like, well, I just want a utilitarian vehicle versus I care for a big car that has a high status value. So through that, you automatically start having things like, well, I'm not likely to get a small rental because it doesn't fit my status requirements. If I remember correctly, there are some questions asked about this clearly, but in very many cases there were no available options. So people simply, they could say anything on the survey, but since there is no meaningful options on the market, in some cases, what would they answer? Well, sure. Then you get these meaningless answers. So again, it was the Tel Aviv team that did the survey design. And if you're interested, please send me an email. I can share that. I think it's public, all of it anyway, so you can see more detail what they've done. And then on the outcomes, it's tricky. It's tricky. We show that in some cases, and specifics I will have to look up, in some cases you could see a change in environmental impact, largely dependent on, of course, the scale of uptake. Some of the systems, for example, for grey water recycling, are quite large, so physically, so these are pipes and systems that need to be built, and then given the environmental impact of some of the water, it's very, very inconclusive, quite often. I think with the integrated pest management, if I recall correctly, we did see good changes, mainly because of more careful application. So direct, like ecotoxicity and impacts, whatever. You're spraying stuff to kill stuff, so sure. When you spray less, it works better. So there we saw it specifically when, in the case studies where high skill levels are required to use a product, such as integrated pest management. But for others, it wasn't that clear. So it was not as nice as we would have wished it to be. So yeah, it's kind of gray, sorry.
So we would have to choose really the domains, let's say, where services would work better than...
Yeah, from what I've seen so far is you really cannot say in general that it will work better. Mainly because, well, what happens to the rebound? That's of course the big question. And if I spend all my money to an extra trip to the Hawaii's, in my airplane, then that's it.
Yeah.
If I consume other things much more instead, and we did not simply dare touch that. We just said, okay, we know it's a big thing and we don't know how to deal with it sensibly. So, yeah.
And going back to the sharing, just a brief observation. Even when there are options out there, like for example, this is maybe stretching the concept a bit, but cooperative, co-housing, sorry. So you have alternatives for co-housing in several European countries, but still the number of people that really take this up is still very low.
Right.
So there are some other deep-seated things there, obstacles to actually, sharing, communitization, let's say.
Right.
Yeah.
So specifically the water case study has shown that. So specifically in the water case study, we've seen, also based on the surveys, very, very low uptakes, which was very disappointing from the environmental perspective, but the case study team looked at it and said, well, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Nobody cares, right? If you're not paying for your water anyway, why on earth would I bother to spend money to save something I'm not paying for?
Yeah.
And in this case, the system structure is such that it's very difficult to move. You would have to, in this case, to make mandatory metering, make it really expensive, but then you have all sorts of justice issues, and you know it better than I do, I think. So in this case, no, there was simply no space for that.
Yeah, maybe this is a naive idea, but what would happen if you take an agent-based model and you initialize the model starting with your option, reverse the time, and go back? I mean, sounds like backcasting.
I take you're not a modeler, right? You're not a computer person. Are you? No? If you manage to crack that problem, then that would be. I think there's a few people in Sweden that will probably want to call you for a Nobel Prize. Something with MP completeness and intractability and no, it is a exceptionally difficult thing you're asking. If not strictly, please help me out. But probably impossible from a mathematical perspective, right? You cannot ungenerate a pattern. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
I think I was asking a much simpler question.
No, but that's a great question. It's just that the answer is potentially far more profound
Yeah,
than
I
you.
have to think more. You produce this, you put error. You just pick one, the mean.
No, look, the error bars are several thousand repetitions of a model, right?
Exactly.
So they are possible futures because the randomness in a simulation.
We can play, you know? So we
Sure.
take one. And then reverse the time and try to go backwards. And then we may produce several pasts. Or maybe it works different.
I think it works different. I wouldn't have no idea how to reverse the past.
Time.
But maybe-
sorry.
I know, I understand what you're asking. I'm
Okay, Jaco has
Yeah.
Yes, please.
to add.
I just would like to give a small addition that actually when I said about the relevance of agent-based modeling for visions or for backcasting is that you have a final stage where you want to go, but you can change in the inputs and the conditions and the variables, and then you can see where your model brings you, and that will help you to learn more about how you can get there. But what you are actually describing for doing with a model is a bit too complicated, because that's what we say what the human intelligence still may win from the computers, because they're and they can reason backwards, but they do that at a rather abstract way, which then need to be simplified to be put in models or deconstructed. But reasoning backwards at this very abstract way, it's a bit more difficult to do that in a model. That's actually how I would explain it as a non-modeler.
Short with it, so I don't know, I'll just try. I think what Paolo is saying is that you start with all the assumptions of the future and you put them in at the beginning. And for example, you had a subsidy or a presence or a rise in a subsidy and just have a reduction or an absence of a subsidy.
Oh yeah, but that's of course trivial, yes.
Yeah.
No, but so the question as you posed it would be to dissimulate, and that would be, yeah.
The problem I see is this with the realization of the random values. So there's there are random values.
Yeah, but they can be fixed, that's not a problem. Yeah. No, but so yes, parameterization and growing these patterns, that's fine. And you can parameterize any way you want. Right? And that's a very useful exercise to think, well, what if? Because that's exactly what ABMs are great at. If I assume the world is like this, where could it go to? But if you say I have this end state and you try to think of every possible agent interaction that could have led to that state, then it's the rest of the universe you're calculating that. There's not, it's vast amounts of computation that are involved in
Even
this.
for a very simple law, because what you have proposed is complicated. One-dimensional model, one random value. I don't know, I just think.
No, I mean, it's a wonderful idea, it's just,
I have another question
yeah, computational theory is sort of
to
against
add
this
to
here.
this. So I have actually a question to the audience. So if we think about the common theme about these three lectures, it's maybe about visions, maybe about visualization. So if you think about Diana's presentation, the nice tool I think was you have the calculator. You can go to this website, you can compare your region to other regions. Jaco talked about visions, that's clear. He developed he collected 3 visions out of the workshops. It's giving you a picture of how some people think the world could be and should be. Right? And finally, Igor had pictures with the variation, and he said, be careful with these pictures, but he talked in terms of pictures. So my question to you is, how useful are these pictures to you? Because we used to think, are these predictions, are these pictures, are these tools useful for policymakers? But maybe we should reverse the question. We should ask, are they useful for us, for our way of organizing our life, but also our way to operate in these new initiatives, in these new lifestyle cooperatives and so on. So who wants to respond to this question? Yeah.
Quite simple. The latest manuals with electronics are with pictures and no text. It's easier. They don't read. They look to the pictures.
And
They
more
know.
concretely, this type of information we here get, the footprints, the visions, the possible scenarios. Can you use this in your daily practice of how to manage your cooperative?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, Sjak.
The problem is, though, these things hide a tremendous amount of complexity and tremendous amount of assumptions. And these are very sharp tools, and one can cut themselves very easily. So the amount of sort of stakeholder training that needs to go into these things being effective is very, very high, right? Because you need to understand what these things are telling you. Sure, you can see, oh, that's higher. But under these conditions, with that assumption, and the 750 other assumptions made, which are all wrong, but they might be very subtly wrong or very horribly wrong. But if you understand the assumptions, then the picture tells you many things, because you know, with that understanding of reality, this is possible, maybe even likely. So you need that with the picture. Just the image itself is very misleading.
Thank you, Jack, for that question, because that's very that's one of the main points I think about, that we're always thinking in terms like, why are the policymakers not listening to this and that? But the information there is there, and there's citizens organizing themselves, and all these pictures, from my perspective, answer what do you should focus your energy to, right? Maybe you are environmentally aware and you like the forest and so on, but it's actually not, your effort is maybe not throwing garbage or picking it up, but if you really are truly interested in this, these are the pictures that empower. This is the knowledge that empowers individuals and groups. And I really like your name is Igor, right? From a modeling perspective, your skepticism to your own models, and I share that. But I think what we try to do is like, which is less wrong, or if you compare like which in all the cases points to a better outcome, and these are the ones that you more confidently put to, and this is how we steer, like the most safe cases. That's why we try to do at NTNU as well, to measure all the other impacts, not only measure CO2 but ecotoxicity or human toxicity, so we're well aware of how wrong we are and what is the less risky path.
If I may respond to that, I would turn it around. And you're getting your fitness today, right? So, thank you. I would like to turn that around and say it's not about what is less risky, but identifying the obviously dumb.
Yeah.
And that's because there is so it's a negative knowledge, so it's always a bit safer than this works, saying no, this doesn't work, right? If you put these connections and these interactions, you're going to hit a wall. So please, stakeholder or decision maker, do not do these things. And there might be endless other things that you could do that are maybe equally bad, but at least for these I know they will not work, because even the simple mechanisms I described are sufficient to show you that you're crashing.
The only problem in implementing that, I feel, is like nobody will thank you for preventing something.
Yeah, no, you're right.
It's like nobody will remember that these guys prevented us from hitting the wall. They will just remember who saved you or something like that.
True. Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that as well. I think we've been really focusing a lot at NTNU at communicating our results through pictures and through other methods, because we're really happy to be working in a field that's really easy for people to relate to, because basically everyone is a consumer and everyone has certain environmental impacts embodied in their consumption. So I think it's we should use this for our advantage. And a picture is often a really good way for you to really see where the hot spots are. So I remember at a conference last year, there were several presentations in my panel on how to reduce water consumption, for example, direct water consumption. And I'm all for that. But in a model like this, you could see that the direct water impacts that occur in our houses, they're about 5%. On average in Europe from our total water consumption. Mm-hmm. So then I say, it'll be, if you're really interested in reducing your impact, focus on this indirect water use. So reduce your meat consumption, for example, reduce processed food, water intensive crops, and of course implementing that at home is one way to go, but it's not everything, and we should realize the limitation of that, and visualization is good for showing that.
It's actually just a chance to get to the drinks, because we can use more water or other kinds of drinks. So if there is no further important question, yeah, a question about water use?
Drinks.
Sorry, not about drinks, but about the policy packages,
Yes,
because I
please.
thought that was really interesting. Because in economics, we generally just look at one policy
Yes.
at a time, and obviously the interactions between them are very important. So how did you determine the synergies or the opposing? Was it from just thinking that these work together, or did you look at the action and see that these two were cumulative in their effect, or how did you do that?
Yes, thank you for that. Excellent question. This was a new thing for me when I started the project. This whole idea comes from Professor Eran Feitelson and Moshe Givoni from Tel Aviv and Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And one of the things that they did is organize a social process. So this is qualitative information on, well, talk to stakeholders, think about the political situation and say, well, this will never fly with this other thing because this lies very badly. So it is a really staged process. I kind of flattened it in my presentation, but it's much more elaborate. They have a few papers published on the process, so you're welcome to contact me. I'll send you some info. But yes, it's qualitative information that has been encoded first in sessions, in large sheets, which we have then digitized and made pretty, but it's really just people's ideas of what will work. And if you do this really well, which I think we were not that successful in getting enough policy-making stakeholders involved, I think it's a very powerful technique to really map it out. Keeping in mind, of course, that especially the the sort of acceptable packages are always a bit tricky. So, you know, politics being what it is, suddenly something that's unacceptable becomes very easily acceptable. But you can still test them out and say, well, what could it happen? And then maybe you can, play with it and say, well, this unacceptable package is actually highly effective. How about we start talking about it, and maybe we should think about this. Yeah.
Okay. There's many questions, so that means we learned more than when we went to the minister, I think. So you chose the right session.
Yes.
I think we can close the session, if that's correct. Jaco is really in charge, so we should
Yes.
we can. So that we can have drinks. Thanks for attending, and I hope you will have a gezellig samen zijn. What was the term again of all the community activities? Part of the reason to be here is maybe the social reason, so let's celebrate. Thank you.
Thank you.